The morning sun barely broke through the tall, arched windows of the Jefferson County Courthouse, yet inside, the air was already thick with tension. The polished wood panels reflected the low murmur of voices as court staff prepared the courtroom for another day of testimony. Lawyers shuffled papers, double-checking notes and evidence folders, the sound of pens scratching on legal pads creating a quiet percussion that competed with the distant hum of the city outside. Reporters clustered near the back, cameras in hand, microphones balanced in careful positions, and smartphones already poised to capture every subtle gesture, every carefully chosen word. At the front near the defense table sat Rex. He was a German shepherd, a police dog whose career spanned nearly 6 years, trained to sniff out narcotics, detect explosives, and assist in tracking dangerous criminals. Rex sat perfectly upright, ears perked, chest out, a calm but powerful presence that demanded attention without uttering a sound. His handler, Officer Daniels, a man in his mid-40s with a face hardened by years on the force, sat beside him, reading over the case files one last time. There was a quiet rhythm to their partnership. The dog and the officer were not just colleagues. They were a team, built on trust, understanding, and countless hours of training together. In the courtroom gallery, away from the hubbub of reporters and lawyers, a small girl clutched her mother's hand. She was just 3 years old, with golden curls bouncing gently as she squirmed slightly in her seat, fidgeting with the edge of her tiny dress. Her eyes were wide, absorbing everything she saw: the imposing wooden judge's bench, the line of uniformed officers at the back, the serious faces of jurors who barely glanced her way, and most of all, the magnificent dog at the front of the room. She didn't understand the legal proceedings, of course. The concept of a courtroom of witnesses and verdicts was beyond her comprehension, but Rex, she understood. Something about him seemed calm, reliable, and noble, a figure of quiet strength she could relate to. The trial was scheduled to last for several days, but today was the first witness testimony, a crucial moment in a case involving local organized crime and a series of break-ins that had unsettled the community for months. The air was tense, every person in the courtroom acutely aware that one slip of a word, one small misstatement, could sway the jury and potentially decide the fate of the accused. The gallery was packed, citizens who followed the case, local reporters, and a handful of law students eager to observe real courtroom procedures. Everyone expected focus, seriousness, and adherence to the rigid rules of decorum that governed such spaces. Rex remained still, seemingly unbothered by the noise, the murmurs, or the movements of people around him. His eyes, dark and intelligent, scanned the room with quiet vigilance. He wasn't just a dog. He was a living reminder of law enforcement's silent guardians, the unseen efforts that often went unnoticed by the public. Officer Daniels occasionally reached down to adjust Rex's stance, a light hand on the dog's shoulder that spoke of familiarity and mutual respect. Those who knew police work understood the significance of this quiet partnership. Rex's training allowed him to sense danger, recognize subtle threats, and offer support that human officers could not. Meanwhile, the toddler's fascination with Rex grew. She had been fidgeting for minutes, trying to peek over the back of the pew in front of her to get a better view. "Mommy," she whispered, her small voice barely audible over the hushed chatter, "Doggy." Her mother chuckled softly, brushing a curl from the girl's forehead and whispering back, "Shh, honey, be quiet." But the girl was undeterred. Her curiosity was uncontainable, driven by the innate recognition that animals, especially dogs, carried emotions and qualities that humans sometimes forgot in moments of stress or seriousness. She tilted her head, studied Rex's posture, and mimicked him, folding her hands, sitting upright, as if trying to understand what made him so calm while everyone else was tense. Across the courtroom, lawyers paused briefly, noticing the child staring, but their attention immediately returned to their notes. Jurors glanced at the girl, some smiling faintly, some shaking their heads at what seemed like a harmless distraction. Reporters, accustomed to observing strange courtroom moments, did not flinch, though a few quietly aimed their cameras in the direction of the child, sensing a potential human interest story. Yet nothing could have prepared anyone for what was about to happen. The tiny girl's innocence was about to pierce the intensity of the courtroom in a way no one anticipated. The judge entered, her black robe sweeping the polished floor, and the room fell into a formal silence. Her presence alone demanded attention, and the murmurs died down almost instantly. She carried herself with the authority expected of someone who presides over justice every day, yet even she seemed momentarily softened by the sight of the small girl in the gallery. The trial began, voices echoing off the wood-paneled walls as opening statements were made, evidence introduced, and witnesses sworn in. All eyes focused on the proceedings, except one little pair that stayed locked on the front of the room. The child's gaze was unwavering, her attention entirely on Rex. Minutes passed, testimony flowed, and the tension in the courtroom mounted. The jury leaned forward, lawyers exchanged sharp glances, and reporters scribbled furiously, capturing every detail. But in the gallery, the child's fascination became more pronounced. She whispered again, "Doggy," and pointed directly at Rex. Officer Daniels noticed and gave a soft chuckle, adjusting Rex's posture slightly so he remained perfect and composed. There was a brief connection, a shared understanding between the dog and the little girl that went beyond words. The child didn't know the danger Rex had faced, the criminals he had tracked, or the lives he had helped save, but she recognized something deeper: his loyalty, his strength, his presence. The mother tried to quiet her, whispering, "Please, honey," the courtroom, but the toddler's attention was fixed. Her tiny fingers reached out, not touching but pointing as if to signal, "Look at him. He is special." Around the room, subtle shifts occurred. The jurors noticed the girl's excitement, exchanging quiet glances. Lawyers tried to keep their composure but couldn't help the faint smiles that tugged at their faces. Even the judge's eyes softened for a fraction of a second. The tension, heavy and suffocating moments ago, was now punctuated by innocence and wonder, a momentary reprieve from the weight of justice. Rex, for his part, seemed almost aware of the child's gaze. His ears perked, head tilted slightly, and tail moved ever so subtly, a gentle acknowledgement. He remained composed, professional, yet there was a warmth in the interaction that transcended the formality of the courtroom. The silent understanding between dog and child was palpable. It was a connection that spoke of trust, curiosity, and unspoken admiration. The courtroom, so rigid and tense, now held within it a quiet miracle, the recognition of heroism, innocence, and the simple, undeniable bond between a human and a dog. As the trial continued, the child's presence and fascination remained a quiet hum in the background. Little did anyone know, the moment was building towards something that would stop the courtroom in its tracks, a moment that would be captured, shared, and remembered far beyond the walls of Jefferson County. What was about to happen would turn the seriousness of the trial into a human story that touched hearts nationwide, showing that even in places of law and formality, simple gestures of recognition and kindness could create unforgettable moments. The courtroom buzzed, papers shuffled, pens scratched, and the judge's gavel occasionally tapped the block. But the room now contained more than the weight of law. It contained anticipation, curiosity, and a quiet tension between innocence and authority. Everyone present, knowingly or not, was waiting for a spark, a moment to break the monotony of seriousness. The toddler, the dog, and the audience were on the edge of witnessing something extraordinary. A simple, pure interaction that would ripple through the courtroom and beyond. And then quietly the tiny girl shifted in her seat, pointed, and prepared to speak. The trial had barely begun when the true weight of the courtroom's tension became apparent. Lawyers spoke in clipped, deliberate tones, their voices sharp and measured. Witnesses delivered testimony with caution, carefully chosen words hanging in the air. Every eye followed the proceedings, jurors leaning in, intent on hearing every nuance. Yet amid the seriousness, a quiet presence anchored the room: Rex, the police dog. His posture was impeccable, muscles taut but relaxed, ears angled slightly forward, and eyes dark, intelligent and unblinking. The dog had been trained for years to recognize danger, to respond instantly to subtle cues, and to protect his handler in every conceivable situation. Officer Daniels, his handler, adjusted his tie, then lowered a hand to Rex's back. "Steady, boy," he murmured. Rex's tail twitched in acknowledgement, a small, almost imperceptible movement. Yet it was enough to indicate his awareness, his calm vigilance, and his readiness for anything. While the courtroom buzzed with human anxiety and the noise of legal formalities, Rex's presence exuded something entirely different: confidence, reliability, and unwavering focus. For those who knew him well, he was more than a dog. He was a partner, a protector, a silent force that shaped the energy of any room he entered. In the gallery, the toddler's fascination grew. Her mother glanced nervously at her daughter, whispering, "Stay still, sweetie," but the girl was entranced. Her small hands fidgeted in her lap as her wide eyes studied Rex, following the subtle rise and fall of his chest with each breath. The courtroom's tension was palpable, yet the toddler seemed to sense something deeper in the dog. She tilted her head, mimicking his posture, and whispered almost to herself, "Strong doggy." She didn't understand what strong meant in legal terms, but she understood it in instinctive, childlike clarity. Rex was dependable, noble, and unafraid, even in a room filled with serious humans. Lawyers occasionally glanced toward the gallery, noticing the tiny figure fixated on the dog. Some smiled softly, recognizing the universality of children's wonder. Others frowned, worried the girl might disrupt the courtroom decorum. The judge, presiding with her usual stern professionalism, seemed to notice but paid no attention, until the little girl shifted again, leaning slightly forward in her seat, her eyes never leaving Rex. The courtroom had settled into a rhythm of legal procedure: questions, answers, objections, and note-taking. But beneath it all, an unusual tension hummed, a silent anticipation that something remarkable might occur. Rex's calm extended to those around him. His presence seemed to influence the energy of the room, subtly relaxing the humans who noticed him. Even Officer Daniels could sense it, a familiar effect Rex always had, a mixture of respect, awe, and reassurance. The dog's gaze swept the room periodically, noting movements, tracking the judge's gestures, and scanning the jurors with professional detachment. He didn't bark, growl, or fidget. He merely existed, embodying discipline, intelligence, and loyalty, a living testament to the quiet heroism that often goes unnoticed behind the headlines of police work. The toddler became increasingly animated, though she tried to remain quiet. Her fingers twitched, her lips moved in small murmurs, and she tilted her head, studying every detail of Rex's posture. She whispered softly to her mother, "He's so big, he's so strong." Her mother laughed quietly, shaking her head. "Yes, honey, he is, but remember, we're in the courtroom." Yet the toddler's fascination could not be contained. She pointed intermittently, her tiny voice almost blending with the background noise, yet distinct in its curiosity. She had an instinctive understanding that Rex was more than a dog. The jurors, focused on the testimony, occasionally shifted their attention to the gallery. One juror, a middle-aged man with glasses, noticed the girl's fascination and exchanged a knowing glance with his neighbor. The child's attention on Rex was pure, unfiltered, and unexpected. Even the stenographer, tapping away at the keyboard, paused momentarily, her eyes drawn to the small figure and the majestic dog. The courtroom, filled with rules, formalities, and legal seriousness, had unknowingly become a stage for a silent connection between innocence and authority. As the trial progressed, Rex demonstrated his quiet heroism in subtle ways. He remained still during testimony, yet his alertness was palpable. When a witness fidgeted nervously, Rex's ears twitched and he shifted slightly, always maintaining composure. Officer Daniels occasionally gave him a soft hand signal, which Rex acknowledged instantly. The dog's presence was not merely ceremonial, it was an active, stabilizing force in a tense environment. And all the while, The toddler watched, absorbing every movement, every subtle cue, intuitively understanding the dog's purpose and the silent strength he represented. Minutes turned into hours, but the child remained captivated. She leaned closer to her mother, whispering, "Doggy looks at everyone, he sees everything." Her mother smiled, brushing a curl behind her daughter's ear, and whispered, "Yes, honey, he's a very special dog." The girl's eyes sparkled, a mixture of awe and curiosity. She did not understand the seriousness of the trial, the stakes involved, or the legal arguments unfolding before her. But she understood loyalty, courage, and calm presence, and she recognized them in Rex in a way that adults often overlook. Around the room, subtle reactions continued. Lawyers and jurors became aware of the quiet fascination of a child, a human witness to the silent heroism of a K-9 officer. Reporters adjusted their cameras subtly, sensing the potential human interest story developing before them. The judge maintained her composure but occasionally glanced toward the gallery. The courtroom, though consumed with legal proceedings, had begun to shift in energy. There was an undercurrent of warmth, a reminder that even in serious, formal spaces, moments of connection and recognition could emerge unexpectedly. Rex, ever vigilant, responded subtly to the energy around him. He adjusted his position slightly as a door opened in the back of the room, his gaze flicking toward the movement. Officer Daniels whispered, "Steady, boy," and Rex settled instantly, a testament to his training. The dog's discipline was matched only by his quiet understanding of humans. In the gallery, the toddler mirrored his stillness for a few moments, fascinated by the poise and authority the dog embodied. It was a dance of observation, silent and compelling, a connection that bridged age, species, and circumstance. By mid-morning, the courtroom had settled into a rhythm, yet the child's fascination remained the heartbeat of a story no one else realized was unfolding. Every observer, from jurors to reporters, was subconsciously influenced by the juxtaposition of innocence and authority. The little girl's attention to Rex reminded everyone that even in places dominated by rules, order, and tension, purity, curiosity, and recognition of courage could shine through. The stage was being set, though no one knew it yet, for a moment that would stop the room completely, an unexpected and unforgettable acknowledgement that would ripple far beyond the courthouse walls. And the toddler, eyes wide, hands fidgeting, and voice poised on the edge of uttering something monumental, leaned slightly forward in her seat. The courtroom was a symphony of quiet urgency. Lawyers spoke in deliberate tones, witnesses gave measured answers, and the judge's gavel occasionally tapped to restore focus. Yet, amid the orchestrated seriousness, one pair of eyes was completely unmoved by procedure or legal formalities. The toddler's gaze remained fixed on Rex, the German shepherd sitting stoically at the front of the courtroom. To the adults around her, he was a trained officer, a symbol of authority and calm discipline. But to her, he was much more, a figure of silent strength, an almost magical presence that demanded attention without a single sound. The little girl leaned slightly forward, her tiny fingers gripping the edge of the wooden pew. She whispered softly to herself, "He's watching, he sees everything," a murmur that only her mother could hear. Her curls bounced as she shifted in her seat, balancing precariously on the edge, unwilling to turn her gaze away. The courtroom's energy, tense and heavy with anticipation, seemed to bend subtly around her focus. It was as though, in her innocent fascination, she had noticed a deeper truth the adults had overlooked. Rex was not just a dog. He was a being capable of understanding, of protecting, and of commanding respect through presence alone. Officer Daniels observed the scene with quiet pride. Rex had always had a way of connecting with humans, even in stressful situations. It was one of the reasons he had been chosen for high-profile trials, demonstrations, and community events. But he had never encountered a spectator quite like this. A child so small, so unassuming, yet completely captivated by him. The subtle twitch of Rex's ears, the faint wag of his tail, and the calm, steady blink of his eyes seemed almost like a conversation, silent and profound, between dog and child. Daniels kept his hand lightly on Rex's shoulder, a grounding presence for both of them. The gallery remained mostly quiet, with whispers carefully muffled and movements deliberate. Jurors shifted in their seats, occasionally glancing toward the little girl. Some smiled, recognizing the universal charm of a child's wonder. Others raised subtle eyebrows, unsure if the distraction might influence the seriousness of the trial. Lawyers and court officials continued their work, but a quiet awareness had spread. Something unusual, something beyond the procedural routine was unfolding. Even the stenographer's fingers paused briefly on the keyboard, her attention momentarily drawn to the tiny observer at the back. The toddler, oblivious to the scrutiny, continued her silent study of Rex. She noticed the rise and fall of his chest with each breath, the way his ears subtly swiveled toward even the smallest sound. She observed the faint twitch in his jaw, the alertness in his posture, and the subtle movements of his muscles as he maintained perfect balance. It fascinated her, this silent, disciplined strength. Unlike the adults who measured time in minutes, statements, and objections, she measured it in observation, in detail, in curiosity, in awe of a creature whose presence radiated calm authority. Her mother whispered again, urging her to stay seated and quiet. "Honey, remember, we're in the courtroom," she said softly. The girl nodded but did not take her eyes off Rex. Her fascination had grown into something deeper than mere curiosity. She studied his gaze, noting how he scanned the room, alert yet composed. She tilted her head, mimicking him as though she were trying to understand what made him so calm, so strong, and so commanding. There was a stillness in her that mirrored the dog's own poise, a child's unconscious imitation of a masterful presence. The trial progressed and the atmosphere thickened. Lawyers argued points with precise articulation, witnesses recounted their experiences, and the jury leaned in to catch every word. But there was an undercurrent beneath the legal proceedings, a subtle human reaction to the small figure observing the K-9 officer. One juror, a woman with a sharp suit and neatly tied hair, leaned closer to her neighbor and whispered, "Look at her. She's completely fascinated by that dog." Another juror, a man adjusting his glasses, nodded quietly. "It's amazing how children notice things adults overlook," he murmured. Even in a courtroom designed to prioritize logic, procedure, and formality, innocence commanded attention. Rex remained steadfast, undistracted by whispers, movements, or the occasional camera click. His training allowed him to filter out background noise, but his awareness of human energy remained precise. He sensed the curiosity of the little girl, her admiration, her tentative understanding of his role. Though he did not move toward her, his presence spoke volumes, a silent reassurance that he was aware, that he acknowledged her attention, and that there was a bond forming without a single word exchanged. Officer Daniels gave him a slight nod, recognizing the connection, and Rex subtly responded with a gentle shift in posture, maintaining both discipline and engagement. Minutes passed, yet the toddler's fascination only grew. She leaned forward slightly, whispering once more, "He's watching, he sees all." Her mother smiled quietly, brushing her fingers along the child's hair. "Yes, honey, he does. That's why he's a special dog," she murmured. But the girl's focus was absolute. She did not notice the people around her, the seriousness of the proceedings, or the formal structure of the courtroom. All she saw was Rex, majestic, poised, and attentive, a figure who embodied courage, discipline, and quiet power. In her small mind, he was more than a dog. He was a hero, even without performing any heroic act at that moment. Across the courtroom, subtle reactions continued. Lawyers adjusted papers, glanced at the gallery, and then returned to their arguments, trying to maintain composure. Jurors exchanged quiet looks, some nodding in acknowledgement of the unusual human interest moment. Reporters raised their cameras, framing the toddler and the dog, anticipating a story beyond legal proceedings. Even the judge, who rarely allowed her attention to wander, noticed the child's unwavering gaze. The courtroom, steeped in procedure and authority, now carried a faint current of warmth and curiosity, all centered on the silent dialogue unfolding between girl and dog. The toddler's fascination became almost tangible, a pulse that spread quietly through the room. She began to mimic more of Rex's subtle movements, sitting straighter, tilting her head, and holding her hands folded as he did. Her quiet observation became an unspoken lesson in stillness, patience, and presence. Those who watched her noticed the effect. Tension seemed to ebb slightly, the air softened, and the rigid lines of procedure loosened just enough to allow humanity, curiosity, and admiration to enter the room. At that moment, the gallery felt suspended in time. The courtroom's official proceedings continued, voices spoke, papers shuffled, and evidence was presented. But the real story, invisible to many, was unfolding quietly. A child and a dog, connected by curiosity and silent respect, had created a moment that would be remembered far beyond the courthouse. The observers who recognized it understood that this connection transcended age, species, and circumstance, and hinted at something profound. That recognition and admiration need not be verbal to be powerful. The little girl's lips moved again, a whisper too soft for most to hear. "Good, strong doggy." She pointed at Rex, her tiny finger trembling slightly with excitement. Officer Daniels caught the motion and allowed a small smile to cross his face, whispering softly to the dog, "You see that boy?" She notices. Rex's ears twitched, and though he remained composed, there was a subtle acknowledgement in his posture, a quiet recognition of the child's admiration and attention. The silent connection had grown into something palpable, an invisible thread linking human and canine in the midst of a serious trial. And as the trial continued, the toddler's fascination deepened. Every movement, every subtle shift in Rex's posture, every attentive glance became part of her understanding. She did not know the full significance of the trial, the importance of the testimony, or the legal stakes, but she understood what mattered most in that moment: courage, strength, and the quiet dignity of a loyal friend. And in that quiet, suspended moment, the stage was being set. The courtroom had been filled with authority, tension, and strict adherence to rules, but now it held anticipation, curiosity, and a profound, silent connection that hinted at an unforgettable moment about to occur. The little girl, eyes wide, tiny hands trembling with excitement, leaned forward in her seat, her gaze locked on Rex, and the world for a fleeting moment held its breath. The courtroom had been humming with tension all morning. Lawyers argued points with precise diction, witnesses spoke carefully, and the judge's gavel marked the rhythm of proceedings. Every detail mattered. Every gesture, tone, and pause could sway jurors and alter the course of the trial. Yet, amid all this weight, a quiet energy had been building, an invisible undercurrent that only the most observant could feel. At the back of the gallery, a small, golden-haired girl leaned forward in her seat, eyes wide, her tiny hands gripping the edge of the pew. Her gaze was fixed entirely on Rex, the police dog whose calm, imposing presence had captivated her since the moment she arrived. The toddler had been watching the dog for what felt like hours, though in reality it was only moments stretched by intense observation. She had noticed his subtle movements, the rise and fall of his chest, the alert flick of his ears, the almost imperceptible twitch of a tail. She had studied the way he scanned the room, acknowledging sounds, movements, and the faint vibrations of energy that humans could not detect. In her own innocent, untrained way, she understood that Rex was not just a dog. He was a silent hero, a presence of courage, loyalty, and discipline that radiated even in the most serious room she had ever seen. Her tiny lips moved as she whispered softly to herself. "Good, strong doggy," she murmured, barely audible. Her mother, sitting beside her, tried to hush her gently. "Shh, honey, be quiet," she whispered, brushing a curl from the girl's forehead. But the toddler's curiosity and admiration had grown too powerful to contain. Her eyes sparkled and she pointed directly at Rex. The room, filled with adults, professionals, and observers, remained oblivious to the approaching moment, until it happened. With a small, clear voice that carried just enough for those nearby to hear, she said two simple words: "Good boy." Time seemed to stop. Lawyers froze mid-sentence, pens hovering over paper. Jurors blinked in disbelief. The stenographer paused, fingers suspended above the keyboard. Even the judge, who rarely allowed her attention to wander from proceedings, hesitated mid-gavel strike, her eyes drawn to the tiny girl's unwavering gaze. Two words, innocent and unassuming, had cut through the courtroom's tension like sunlight through a storm cloud. They carried no judgment, no agenda, no strategy, just pure, heartfelt recognition. Rex's ears perked slightly, his head tilting ever so subtly toward the source of the sound. His tail gave a faint wag, imperceptible to many but clear to his handler. Officer Daniels allowed a small smile to escape, whispering softly to his partner, "You heard that, boy. She sees you." The courtroom, a place defined by law, procedure, and serious deliberation, had been punctured by the simplicity of human innocence. The dog, the child, and the silent acknowledgement between them had created a moment so powerful that it could not be ignored. The reactions were instantaneous and varied. A juror, a woman in her 40s, blinked and smiled faintly, dabbing at the corner of her eye. "Did she just say that?" she whispered to her neighbor. Another juror, a man adjusting his glasses, let out a soft chuckle, trying to maintain composure. Lawyers glanced at one another, some stifling laughter, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Even the judge's stern expression softened, the corners of her eyes crinkling in a subtle, amused acknowledgement. The courtroom had collectively experienced a jolt of humanity, unexpected and profoundly moving. Reporters quickly reached for their cameras, capturing the image of the tiny girl pointing at Rex, the dog who had commanded such attention. Notes were scribbled frantically, not for legal analysis but to record a story far more compelling: the interaction between innocence and heroism. In that instant, the courtroom transformed. What had been a place of tension and formal procedure became a stage for something much deeper, a testament to connection, admiration, and the ability of the smallest gestures to pierce the heaviest of atmospheres. The toddler's mother looked down at her daughter, a mixture of pride and mild embarrassment flickering across her face. "Yes, honey," she whispered, her voice soft. "He's a very good boy." The child's smile widened, unaware of the impact her two words had created. Her small declaration resonated far beyond her understanding, touching adults who had grown accustomed to the rigidity of law and procedure. Those two words, simple, unfiltered, and pure, had reminded everyone of something fundamental: the power of acknowledgement and appreciation. Rex, sensing the energy shift, remained composed but alert. He had been trained to respond to cues, to act when necessary, but this recognition required no command, no training, only instinct and understanding. His eyes met the child's for a fleeting moment, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. In that gaze was a world of understanding. The dog recognized the admiration, the toddler recognized the courage and loyalty. No words could enhance it, no gesture could surpass it. It was a perfect, unspoken moment of connection. The courtroom gradually recovered from the sudden pause. Lawyers cleared their throats, jurors shifted in their seats, and the judge tapped the gavel lightly to restore order. Yet the energy had changed. The tension that had dominated the room for hours had softened, replaced by something more human: warmth, recognition, and shared experience. People who had been focused on facts and legal arguments were now quietly reminded of the simpler truths that sometimes matter more than any technicality: the recognition of loyalty, courage, and the quiet heroism of those who serve. Whispers began to circulate quietly. Some jurors exchanged smiles and comments about the child's boldness. Reporters began to murmur about the unexpected story developing before them, recognizing the potential for human interest. Cameras adjusted, capturing the image of the toddler and Rex, the dog who had inadvertently become the centerpiece of a story that would soon spread far beyond the walls of the courthouse. Even those who remained focused on the legal aspects of the trial could not ignore the profound impact of the simple, two-word declaration. Officer Daniels patted Rex's shoulder lightly, a quiet affirmation of both the dog's discipline and the moment's significance. "Good boy, Rex," he murmured under his breath. The dog's ears twitched, acknowledging the compliment, yet remaining poised and professional. This was not a performance. It was instinct, observation, and an unspoken dialogue between a child and a police dog. The courtroom had been transformed, if only briefly, by the pure energy of recognition and admiration. The toddler's smile was wide now, the culmination of curiosity, fascination, and understanding. She had expected nothing in return, no applause, no acknowledgement, no reaction, but the reaction she received was profound. Adults around her were smiling, whispering, and sharing subtle glances of delight. The courtroom, a place that had been defined by tension and protocol, was suddenly united by one small voice. Those two words, so simple yet so powerful, had pierced through seriousness and bureaucracy, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. Even the judge, who returned to the proceedings with professional composure, could not entirely erase the warmth from her expression. She gave a subtle nod toward the gallery, acknowledging the child without disrupting the formal flow of the trial. In the back of the room, reporters whispered quietly, ensuring their cameras remained focused on the scene. Social media, already poised to share courtroom news, would soon capture the magic of the moment. The tiny voice of a 3-year-old had turned a day of legal proceedings into something far more meaningful, a story of innocence, admiration, and connection. And so, in the midst of a high-stakes trial, the courtroom held its breath. Two words had transformed the room: "Good boy." A simple phrase spoken by a small, golden-haired child had achieved what few adult statements ever could. It was a reminder that power does not always lie in authority, procedure, or training. Sometimes, the smallest voice can create the loudest impact, a quiet but unshakable force that leaves an indelible mark on everyone who witnesses it. For Rex, the acknowledgement was subtle but profound. His tail twitched, his posture remained impeccable, and his gaze softened just enough to honor the child's recognition. Officer Daniels, standing quietly beside him, allowed himself a rare smile, knowing that this simple moment would be remembered far longer than any trial testimony or legal argument. And for the toddler, it was the beginning of a lifelong understanding that courage, loyalty, and recognition transcend age, species, and circumstance. The courtroom was still reverberating from the tiny voice that had cut through its usual tension. "Good boy." For a few moments, everyone seemed frozen, not in silence of confusion, but in quiet astonishment. Lawyers paused mid-gesture, witnesses stopped mid-sentence, and even the judge hesitated with gavel poised. The words had been simple, innocent, and entirely unplanned, yet their impact rippled through the room like a stone cast into still water. Eyes darted toward the toddler, whose tiny finger still pointed unwaveringly at Rex, her wide eyes reflecting pure admiration. The jurors were the first to react. A wave of quiet smiles spread among them, subtle yet unmistakable. One juror, a middle-aged woman with steel-rimmed glasses, pressed a hand to her lips, stifling a laugh. Another, a man with a neatly trimmed beard, shook his head in amazement. "She's brave," he whispered to the person beside him. A few others tried to maintain neutrality, but their expressions betrayed the warmth that had entered the room. For hours, they had been focused on legal arguments, witness testimonies, and meticulous evidence. In that instant, all those formal concerns were eclipsed by the pure humanity of a child's recognition. Lawyers, ever trained to maintain composure, were not immune to the effect. Defense and prosecution alike froze for a beat, eyes flicking toward the gallery. Some quickly adjusted their ties, hiding the faint smiles tugging at their lips. Others scribbled in their notes, struggling to refocus on the trial while simultaneously acknowledging the moment that had shifted the atmosphere. Even in a space devoted to facts and argumentation, they could not ignore the emotional truth in front of them. A tiny girl had connected with a police dog in a way that commanded attention. The judge, presiding over the proceedings with her usual authority, allowed herself the smallest of nods. She cleared her throat, tapped the gavel lightly, and said, "Let us continue." But her eyes softened, and a fleeting smile crept across her face, betraying the quiet amusement and admiration she felt. Courtrooms were not meant for displays of innocence or sentiment, yet today, the judge recognized that the law was being momentarily enriched by a human moment of authenticity. She had seen many disruptions in her career, but none so genuine and pure as this. Reporters at the back of the room quickly sensed the human interest story unfolding before them. One discreetly raised a camera, framing the toddler pointing at Rex, while another whispered to a colleague, This is gold. People need to see this." The stenographer paused briefly, glancing at the child, then resumed typing, a faint smile touching her lips. Phones quietly recorded the scene, some held low, some discreetly aimed, capturing a moment that could never be recreated. The courtroom, for all its rules and protocols, had become a stage for something far more compelling than legal arguments alone. The ripple of reactions extended beyond the courtroom itself. People in the hallways paused to listen to the muted sounds, hearing snippets of whispers and laughter. Court clerks and bailiffs exchanged glances, some shaking their heads with a mixture of amusement and awe. Outside, the murmurs of city life continued, but inside, a rare and fleeting magic held sway. The energy of innocence had infiltrated the formal rigidity of law, proving that even in the most serious spaces, humanity could prevail. The toddler, oblivious to the broader impact of her words, remained captivated by Rex. She leaned forward slightly, her small body trembling with excitement. "Good boy," she repeated softly, as if affirming her first declaration. The dog's ears twitched, his head tilting ever so slightly, acknowledging the child's voice without breaking his disciplined composure. Officer Daniels allowed a quiet chuckle, resting a hand gently on Rex's shoulder. "She likes you, boy," he murmured, and Rex's subtle tail wag indicated recognition, a silent dialogue between human and canine unfolding in real time. The mother, seated beside her daughter, whispered soothingly, "Yes, honey, he's a very good boy." She didn't fully understand why the room had gone quiet, why the jurors and lawyers were staring, or why even the judge seemed affected. But she understood that her daughter had created a rare, beautiful moment. The child, too small to comprehend fame, influence, or attention, had reminded everyone of the simplest truths. Loyalty, admiration, and appreciation do not require sophistication to carry power. Sometimes, innocence speaks louder than experience. The courtroom began to settle, but the change lingered. Lawyers returned to their notes, witnesses resumed testimony, and the judge continued proceedings. Yet the energy in the room had transformed. Tension had softened, replaced by a quiet warmth. Jurors occasionally glanced toward the gallery, still smiling at the tiny figure of a girl marveling at a dog. Reporters subtly captured every detail, anticipating the story's eventual reach beyond the courthouse walls. Even the seasoned officers in the courtroom felt the unusual weight of human emotion, recognizing that they had witnessed something extraordinary. As the trial continued, whispers quietly circulated. "Did you see that?" a juror asked under his breath. "A 3-year-old just stopped this room." Others nodded, murmuring agreement. People were talking quietly among themselves, exchanging glances of shared recognition. The simple, unpretentious acknowledgement of Rex's worth had reminded everyone present of the power of connection and the profound impact of seemingly small moments. A child's innocence had, quite literally, changed the atmosphere of an entire courtroom. Social media, unbeknownst to those inside, was already beginning to take notice. A phone discreetly recording the toddler's words and gesture would, within hours, be shared nationwide. News outlets would replay the footage, headlines highlighting the tiny girl who had stopped a courtroom with 2 words. Comments and reactions would flood in, praising the child's courage, the dog's calmness, and the beauty of a moment that reminded people everywhere of loyalty and trust. What had begun as a quiet observation had now become a symbol of human connection. Officer Daniels looked down at Rex, proud not only of the dog's discipline, but of the unexpected emotional resonance the moment had created. "You handled that well, boy," he whispered, fingers brushing lightly over Rex's fur. Rex's ears twitched slightly, his posture perfect, but there was a subtle softness in his gaze toward the child, a recognition of her admiration and a quiet appreciation for the bond that had formed. The dog had done nothing extraordinary, yet the acknowledgement he received amplified his presence in ways no one could have predicted. The toddler's fascination did not wane. She studied Rex's stance, his ears, the gentle movement of his tail, and even the way he responded to the soft guidance of his handler. She whispered under her breath, repeating the words she had already spoken. "Good boy, good boy." She pointed emphatically, clearly understanding in her own way that Rex was deserving of recognition, even if she did not understand why adults found the courtroom so important or serious. In her mind, she was honoring a hero, and that alone made the moment significant. Across the room, the courtroom participants continued to be influenced by this quiet phenomenon. Lawyers struggled to refocus on legal strategy, witnesses occasionally faltered in delivery, and jurors leaned in to capture every nuance of the proceedings. The gavel still struck, evidence was presented, and testimony continued, but the subtle hum of humanity, the invisible energy created by the child's words, remained. The room had shifted from a purely procedural environment to one alive with recognition, admiration, and emotional resonance. Slowly, imperceptibly, the room returned to routine. Proceedings continued, lawyers resumed arguments, and the judge restored full authority with her gavel. Yet the impact of the toddler's simple words lingered like an echo in the walls. The courtroom had been momentarily transformed, a testament to the power of innocence and the universal language of admiration. One small voice had reminded everyone present, adults and children alike, that even in the most serious spaces, humanity could shine. The ripple extended beyond the room. Courthouse staff in nearby offices whispered about the moment. Reporters in the lobby shared the story, phones recording the scene to share with editors. Social media, waiting silently in the background, would soon amplify the child's words across the nation. A 3-year-old girl had reminded an entire courtroom, and eventually an entire country, of the beauty of simplicity, honesty, and recognition. And through it all, the toddler remained focused on Rex, unaware of the attention she had commanded, unaware of the silent admiration of everyone around her. She continued pointing, whispering softly, "Good boy," a phrase that would echo far beyond that courtroom. Rex, ever calm, responded subtly, ears flicking, tail twitching, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had formed in those precious moments. The courtroom had been stopped, not by authority or law, but by innocence, recognition, and 2 perfectly simple words. By the afternoon, the courtroom had returned to its formal proceedings, yet the energy inside was noticeably different. Lawyers continued their arguments, witnesses gave detailed testimony, and the judge maintained her authoritative presence. Still, the room was infused with a subtle warmth that had not been there before, a collective acknowledgement of something extraordinary that had occurred during the morning session. Whispers of the toddler's 2 words, "Good boy," lingered, passing from juror to juror, from lawyer to lawyer, like ripples on a pond. Reporters, now fully aware of the story unfolding, quietly huddled in the back, reviewing the footage captured during the trial. Phones and cameras discreetly recorded the tiny girl pointing at Rex, the majestic German shepherd whose calm presence had captivated her. One reporter, a young woman with sharp eyes and an instinct for human interest stories, leaned over to her colleague. "We have something incredible here," she whispered. "A 3-year-old just stopped a courtroom, and it's going to resonate far beyond these walls." Social media, always waiting for authentic human moments, began to stir. Within hours, videos from the courtroom appeared online, clips of the toddler pointing, whispering, and finally speaking those 2 words. Comments flooded in, expressions of awe, delight, and nostalgia from people all over the country. Some recalled their own childhood interactions with animals, Others marveled at the raw innocence and bravery of a tiny child who had spoken in a formal, intimidating environment without hesitation. The story began to trend nationally, carried by the power of authenticity and human connection. Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, the ripple effect continued. Jurors occasionally glanced toward the gallery, smiles faintly tugging at their lips as they caught sight of the child still watching Rex. Lawyers found themselves momentarily distracted by the warmth of the moment, caught between procedural focus and acknowledgement of the human story that had unfolded before them. Even the judge, typically unflinching and stern, allowed a few fleeting expressions of amusement and admiration to cross her features. In a room dominated by authority and discipline, a small child and a well-trained dog had created something far more meaningful, a shared human experience. The toddler remained blissfully unaware of her newfound fame. She continued pointing at Rex, whispering softly, good boy, a phrase that had already captured the hearts of everyone present. Officer Daniels, observing the interaction, allowed himself a small, proud smile. She likes you, boy, he whispered. Rex, disciplined and calm, responded subtly with a gentle wag of his tail, maintaining composure while acknowledging the silent admiration of the child. It was a rare and perfect moment, a bond formed not through commands or training, but through pure, instinctive recognition. Outside the courtroom, the story spread quickly. Courthouse staff shared the footage among themselves, amazed at the power of such a simple act. Editors at local newspapers immediately recognized the appeal of the story, sending emails to colleagues in national offices. Within hours, the clip of the toddler and Rex appeared on television news, online platforms, and social media channels across the country. Viewers were captivated by the juxtaposition. A tiny, innocent child bravely speaking in a serious courtroom, and a majestic, trained police dog receiving her heartfelt acknowledgement. Families watching at home were particularly moved. Parents saw their own children in the toddler, remembering the moments when their kids marveled at animals with unfiltered curiosity and admiration. Animal lovers, especially those familiar with the discipline and dedication of police dogs, were inspired by the recognition of Rex's silent heroism. The story transcended courtroom procedures and legal arguments. It became a universal tale of courage, loyalty, and the innocence of youth. Journalists began reaching out to Officer Daniels and the mother of the toddler, requesting interviews. The mother, modest and unassuming, explained that her daughter had simply been captivated by Rex, nothing more. She didn't understand the trial or what was happening, the mother said. She just saw him and she admired him, that's all. Officer Daniels, equally humble, explained that Rex was simply doing his job, maintaining calm and professionalism. But somehow, he said with a chuckle, he connected with her, and that's the magic of the moment. The courthouse itself became a place of quiet attention. People who had been visiting for unrelated matters paused to ask about the story, curious about the tiny girl and the dog who had captured national attention. Security officers, clerks, and staff all remarked on the unusual phenomenon, the way innocence and disciplined calm had intersected to create a moment that no one could forget. Even in a space devoted to rules and authority, humanity had found a way to assert itself. Social media continued to amplify the story. Short clips, slowed-down videos, and reaction compilations were shared millions of times. Hashtags celebrating the moment began trending nationwide, with titles such as Good Boy Moment and Toddler and Police Dog capturing the public's imagination. Memes emerged, videos were stitched together with uplifting music, and news articles chronicled the simple but profound interaction. A 3-year-old girl and a German shepherd had become symbols of recognition, bravery, and the unexpected power of innocence in the adult world. Within days, national news outlets picked up the story, framing it as a moment that transcended the legal context. Tiny girl's words stop courtroom, inspire millions, ran one headline. Another read, police dog receives unexpected recognition from child witness in court. Analysts, Commentators and ordinary viewers alike marveled at the simplicity and universality of the moment. People discussed the story in cafes, at workplaces, and online forums, debating the implications, praising the child's courage, and reflecting on the unspoken power of recognition and admiration. Back in Jefferson County, the courtroom itself carried a lingering energy. The trial continued, but participants were subtly changed. Jurors leaned in with renewed focus tempered by empathy. Lawyers found themselves reminded of the human stories behind legal procedures. Witnesses, when speaking, sometimes softened their delivery, perhaps inspired by the reminder that every human story carries emotional weight. Even the judge, while maintaining order and authority, seemed subtly influenced by the memory of the toddler's words, her presence gentled by the acknowledgement of innocence and courage. The toddler, of course, remained blissfully unaware of the attention she had created. She continued pointing at Rex, whispering the words she had learned to associate with admiration and recognition. "Good boy, good boy." For her, it was a simple, personal interaction. Yet for everyone around her, the moment had evolved into something far more significant, a reminder of the power of acknowledgement, of the courage of the smallest voices, and of the extraordinary impact that an innocent gesture can have in even the most formal, serious environments. Officer Daniels, observing from the front, felt a swell of pride not just in Rex but in the unfolding story. The dog, trained for years to act in high-stress situations, had remained poised and professional, yet had also connected with a human in a way that transcended command or obedience. In that quiet, subtle acknowledgement, a bond had formed, invisible yet profound. And the ripple of that bond would continue, extending far beyond the walls of the courthouse, touching hearts and inspiring countless people nationwide. By evening, the story had become more than just a viral clip. News outlets interviewed both mother and handler, social media buzzed with hashtags and commentary, and ordinary people marveled at the unlikely pairing, a 3-year-old girl and a police dog. Analysts commented on the universal appeal of innocence, recognizing heroism, while psychologists noted the impact of such moments on public perception of law enforcement, empathy, and human-animal connections. In a world often consumed by conflict and stress, 2 small words, "good boy," had reminded millions of something simple yet profound: recognition matters. And through it all, the toddler's fascination remained steady. She pointed at Rex, whispered her words, and smiled, entirely unaware of the viral fame she had inadvertently achieved. The courtroom, the city, and eventually the nation had witnessed a moment of human connection so pure that it transcended context, procedure, and expectation. The energy created by her voice and Rex's calm presence lingered in the air, a testament to the enduring power of simplicity, innocence, and admiration. By the next morning, the courtroom story had spread beyond news outlets and social media. It had reached the wider community. People across Jefferson County were talking about the 3-year-old girl who had captivated a courtroom with 2 words, "good boy." Local cafes, grocery stores, and even school playgrounds buzzed with excitement over the unlikely heroes, a tiny child and a disciplined police dog named Rex. The story had transcended typical courtroom interest, capturing the hearts of families, animal lovers, and anyone who appreciated a simple moment of pure connection. Local journalists quickly arranged interviews. The mother of the toddler, modest and slightly overwhelmed by attention, agreed to speak with reporters. She described her daughter's fascination as completely innocent. "She's always loved animals," the mother said, smiling gently. When she saw Rex, she didn't think about the courtroom or the trial. She just saw a big, strong dog and admired him. That's all. The mother's words, humble yet profound, reminded viewers that the most memorable moments often arise from sincerity and innocence, unfiltered by fame or intent. Officer Daniels also participated in interviews. He spoke carefully about Rex, his years of training, and the dog's ability to remain calm under pressure. "Rex is a police K9," Daniels explained, trained for high-stress situations. But what happened yesterday wasn't training. It was recognition, a small child acknowledging a dog who's devoted to helping people. That's the part that's extraordinary. Daniels' calm explanation of Rex's role contrasted beautifully with the viral excitement, grounding the story in reality while still highlighting the magic of the moment. The community reaction was immediate and heartfelt. Local schools discussed the story in classrooms, emphasizing courage, kindness, and recognition. Children shared stories of their own pets or encounters with animals, inspired by the toddler's bravery and curiosity. Parents explained to their kids how even the smallest voice could have a big impact, and how genuine admiration and acknowledgement could create lasting bonds. The story quickly became a teaching moment for families, spreading lessons of empathy and respect beyond the courtroom walls. Even outside the county, people were moved. Social media posts poured in from other states, praising the girl's boldness and the dog's discipline. Commenters shared personal experiences, reflecting on moments when animals had offered comfort or courage in their own lives. Veterinarians, trainers, and animal enthusiasts weighed in, celebrating Rex's calm professionalism and the toddler's intuitive understanding of heroism. The story had become more than a courtroom moment. It had evolved into a national narrative about trust, recognition, and connection between humans and animals. In the courthouse, the ripple effect was still evident. Jurors spoke quietly about the incident, recalling how the child's words had briefly suspended time. "It was amazing," one juror said in a hallway conversation. "You could feel the whole room change when she spoke. 2 words, but it was more than words. It was honesty and admiration." Lawyers, who had initially struggled to hide smiles, later mentioned how the moment reminded them that legal proceedings involve real people, emotions, and stories, not just facts and rules. Even the judge, when asked by a local reporter, commented on the rare but memorable occurrence of genuine humanity breaking through formal proceedings. The toddler herself remained blissfully unaware of the attention she had sparked. She continued to observe Rex whenever she returned to the courthouse for subsequent sessions, whispering softly and pointing, "Good boy, good boy." The dog responded in his own subtle way, ears twitching, tail giving a slight wag, eyes meeting hers in a gentle acknowledgement. Over time, a quiet, almost unspoken bond developed. The girl grew increasingly comfortable around Rex, her admiration transforming into a small, confident trust. In return, Rex exhibited a subtle attentiveness toward her, his calm presence reinforcing safety and familiarity. Local residents who learned about the incident flocked to the courthouse to catch a glimpse of the girl and Rex. They were careful to remain respectful, observing from a distance while the trial continued. Families arrived with children of their own, eager to see the young girl and the dog who had captured national attention. Murmurs of amazement filled the air. People smiled, waved, and whispered to one another about the innocence and bravery of youth, and the incredible discipline and loyalty of trained K9s. The community had collectively embraced the story, finding inspiration in the interaction between the toddler and Rex. Journalists followed up with feature stories highlighting the broader meaning of the event. One article focused on the emotional intelligence of children, exploring how their perception of animals often reveals an instinctive recognition of courage, loyalty, and authority. Another story highlighted the rigorous training that police dogs undergo, emphasizing the unique skill set required to remain calm, disciplined, and protective in stressful situations. Together, these articles created a narrative that blended innocence, training, and emotional resonance, making the story compelling for readers of all ages. The bond between the girl and Rex deepened further in private moments. After court sessions ended, Officer Daniels sometimes allowed brief supervised interactions, where the toddler could approach Rex under careful observation. She would pat his head, whisper her familiar words, and receive in return a subtle acknowledgement. A gentle tilt of the head, a slight wag of the tail, a patient stance that conveyed both reassurance and quiet understanding. These interactions became a source of delight for the girl, a tangible affirmation of courage and recognition that extended far beyond the courtroom. Community leaders also became involved. Local libraries, community centers, and youth programs incorporated the story into educational initiatives. Programs on kindness, recognition, and empathy for animals were developed, inspired by the toddler's spontaneous courage and Rex's calm presence. Teachers and trainers emphasized the value of observation, patience, and recognition, showing children that small gestures can create meaningful impacts. The story became more than entertainment. It became a lesson in humanity, connection, and the importance of paying attention to those around us, human or animal. As the days passed, the story maintained its momentum. News segments featured the toddler and Rex, social media continued to circulate clips, and families shared their interpretations and personal stories. The courtroom had sparked a chain reaction that extended far beyond legal proceedings. It had become a cultural touchpoint, a reminder that innocence and recognition could intersect with discipline and heroism to create a lasting impact. For the community, the nation, and the individuals involved, the story represented something timeless. The profound connection that can occur when a child acknowledges courage and a trained dog responds with quiet understanding. By the end of the week, the courtroom itself had become something of a pilgrimage site. People visited not for legal proceedings, but to witness the space where two words had stopped time. Officer Daniels continued his work, guiding Rex through duties, while the toddler, increasingly recognized for her moment of bravery, visited with her mother, maintaining her calm fascination with the dog. Each visit reinforced the bond they shared, a simple human-to-animal connection that reminded everyone present that heroism, trust, and admiration often transcend words. And through all this, the toddler remained herself, curious, innocent, and genuinely captivated by Rex. Her words, her gestures, and her observations had created a ripple effect that touched hearts far beyond what she could possibly understand. Yet the simplicity of her actions, two words spoken from the heart, had changed the atmosphere of a courtroom, inspired a community, and reminded a nation that recognition, respect, and acknowledgement of courage need not be complicated. Weeks had passed since the courtroom moment that captured national attention. The image of the tiny, golden-haired toddler pointing at Rex, whispering her two simple words, "Good boy," had become iconic. News outlets across the country ran follow-ups, highlighting the bond between the child and the police dog, celebrating the innocence and bravery of youth, and acknowledging the dedication and discipline of K-9 officers. What had begun as an ordinary day in Jefferson County Court had grown into a story that resonated far beyond the courthouse walls. In Jefferson County, the courthouse itself took on a quiet significance. People who had watched the viral video came to visit, quietly observing from the gallery as the courtroom resumed normal operations. Families, teachers, and students walked in, pointing to where the toddler had sat, discussing the lesson of her courage and the recognition she had offered Rex. For many, the story was a teaching tool, a vivid illustration of the power of observation, admiration, and acknowledgement. Children were encouraged to see that small voices could make a big difference, and adults were reminded that empathy and recognition often arrive in the simplest forms. The toddler's mother had become somewhat of a local figure, approached by reporters and community members who wanted to know more about her daughter. She remained modest and composed, emphasizing that her child had acted instinctively without thought of fame or attention. "She just saw Rex," she explained in one interview. "That's all. She admired him and she spoke the words she felt. That's the beauty of children. They recognize courage without overthinking it. They are honest, direct, and pure in their reactions." Her words resonated widely, reflecting the universal appeal of innocence meeting experience. Officer Daniels continued his duties with Rex, now carrying a new appreciation for the intangible connections his dog could form. He had seen many instances of Rex performing under pressure, tracking, protecting, and assisting in law enforcement operations, but none as emotionally profound as the bond formed with a 3-year-old girl in a courtroom. It wasn't about the trial, Daniels reflected in an interview. It was about acknowledgement. She saw something that everyone else overlooked: the courage, the calm, the presence. And Rex, he recognized it back. That's rare, that's special. The toddler herself continued to visit Rex under careful supervision. Each interaction was filled with quiet joy and wonder. She would gently pat his head, whisper her familiar words, and watch the subtle responses: a tilt of the head, a flick of the ear, a slight wag of the tail. Over time, her confidence grew. She learned to approach animals respectfully, understanding their behavior, their cues, and their personalities. This early exposure to trust, observation, and connection instilled in her an intuitive sense of empathy that would shape her interactions for years to come. Schools and local organizations embraced the story as well. Teachers used the viral courtroom moment as a lesson on empathy and courage. Children discussed the importance of paying attention, recognizing the contributions of others, and speaking from the heart. Lessons on the value of observation were paired with activities involving animals, allowing children to understand nonverbal communication, trust, and responsibility. The toddler's simple act of admiration had inspired educational programs, workshops, and discussions that highlighted emotional intelligence in ways textbooks could not. The national attention also sparked conversations about the role of police dogs in communities. Media coverage highlighted the rigorous training these animals undergo, their dedication, and the bonds they form with officers. Rex became an ambassador of sorts, appearing in educational segments, public demonstrations, and community outreach programs. Yet despite the attention, the dog remained composed, disciplined, and attentive to his handler. The viral courtroom moment had not changed his character. It had only showcased the quiet heroism that had always been there, now seen through the eyes of a child. As the weeks turned into months, the toddler's story continued to ripple through public consciousness. Families shared their own moments of recognition and admiration, using the phrase "good boy" not only for dogs but as a symbolic acknowledgement of courage and effort in everyday life. Parents recounted instances where their children emulated the toddler's sincerity, pointing out acts of bravery or kindness in school, at home, or in the neighborhood. What began as a simple courtroom interaction had evolved into a cultural symbol of recognition, innocence, and emotional connection. In Jefferson County, a small ceremony was held at the local courthouse to honor Rex's service and to acknowledge the unique moment that had captured the hearts of so many. The toddler was invited, seated proudly next to her mother. Officer Daniels presented Rex with a commemorative plaque, recognizing both his service and the enduring impact of the viral moment. The child, wide-eyed and smiling, quietly patted Rex's head and whispered, "Good boy," as if reaffirming the bond that had started it all. The room filled with applause, yet the moment remained intimate, focused on connection rather than spectacle. Psychologists and child development experts noted the significance of the toddler's behavior. They emphasized how observing and acknowledging others, whether human or animal, fosters empathy, confidence, and social awareness. By recognizing Rex's calm presence and discipline, the child demonstrated an early understanding of emotional intelligence, courage, and respect. Experts explain that moments like these, though small, can shape a child's worldview, instilling values that influence relationships, moral judgment, and personal growth. Over time, the courtroom moment became more than a viral story. It became a narrative of inspiration. The two words, "good boy," came to represent courage, recognition, and the power of simple, honest acknowledgement. The story reminded adults that humanity often resides in the small gestures, the honest voices, and the quiet observations of those unburdened by cynicism. It reminded children that their words, actions and attention can make a difference, even in spaces filled with authority, rules, and serious matters. The toddler grew, carrying with her the lessons of observation, empathy, and courage. Though she would likely forget the courtroom details as she aged, the imprint of that experience, the joy, the connection, the understanding of trust and admiration, would remain with her. Rex continued his service, disciplined as ever but with an enduring bond to the child who had recognized him in a way no one else had. The memory of their connection became a quietly powerful symbol of mutual respect, trust, and the extraordinary potential of simple recognition. Years later, when the girl looked back on that day, she would remember Rex not just as a police dog, but as the first being whose silent courage she had truly admired. The courtroom, the media attention, the national fascination, they would all fade in significance compared to the personal bond she had formed. It was a moment of innocence meeting heroism, of observation meeting recognition, and of two hearts, one human, one canine, connecting in a pure and timeless way. And in the broader world, the story continued to inspire. Families shared it as an example of courage and empathy. Schools incorporated it into lessons on emotional intelligence. Police departments recognized the value of community engagement through animal programs. Social media users referenced it in discussions about kindness, recognition, and the extraordinary power of ordinary moments. What had started as a quiet observation in a courtroom had become a symbol, a reminder that even the smallest voice can leave a lasting impact. Ultimately, the legacy of those two words endured because of their simplicity, their honesty, and their emotional resonance. Good boy was more than a statement. It was a bridge between innocence and experience, between admiration and discipline, between a child and a dog. It demonstrated that recognition does not require grandeur, fame, or ceremony, only awareness, courage, and the willingness to speak from the heart. For the toddler, the courtroom moment became a foundational memory, shaping her understanding of courage, observation, and connection. For Rex, it became an acknowledgement of his service, a quiet reminder that even the smallest humans can recognize the heroism in animals. For the community, it became a story of inspiration and pride, illustrating that humanity, kindness, and acknowledgement can flourish even in the most formal, structured spaces. And so, the story of the toddler and Rex, of two simple words that stopped a courtroom, remained etched in memory, proof that even the briefest moment, when filled with innocence, courage, and recognition, can leave a legacy far greater than anyone could have imagined.